Hello, everyone, and welcome to our second in our dialogue series. Um, on behalf of Bengaluru Fantastic, my partner Kamya and I would like to welcome you very warmly, all of you, our speakers, especially so our audience and our fellows. We we are a tech art festival based in Bangalore, and in these days that doesn't mean as much because we can be now online with a very international participation. With that, I'd like to first thank our funders, the Goethe Institute, Max Muller Bhavan, Bangalore, and the British Council for supporting this fellowship and these series of dialogues. The TechArt Fellowship, called CoLab, is our attempt as a festival to kind of nurture the field of technology and arts practice. And today's session, Creating TechArt, falls very close to our heart. Um, in these dialogues, we invite conversational, presentational style between experts in the field, practitioners, as well as our fellows, um, and the audience, of course. And we have a provocateur who typically instigates and stirs up the conversation, as it were. Um, Today we have Christoph Fallhaber. He's a German creator. He's known to be an artist, a performer, very well acclaimed filmmaker and author. And many of his critical projects have got a lot of attention. Sebastian Schmeig is also from Germany. He is one of our speakers this evening or afternoon, and he works very closely with how algorithmic circulation of images, texts, and bodies work together. At the center of his practice are playful interventions that are found in systems that explore the hidden realities behind the glossy interfaces of our network societies. And Vishal Kumar Swamy is a Bangalore-based artist. More recently, he was awarded a very big commission called Empathy Loading by the Royal College of Art and Furtherfield in London. He is also the founder of an international artist collective called Now You Have Authority. With that, I'd really like to hand over to Christoph. He will start the session for us. Thank you.
Hello, good morning, or no, it's already noon here. So I hope technically everything works well and you can see and hear me quite good. It seems so, nobody. Yes. Well, thank you very much for inviting me today. So I have been in contact with Archana last year and when I was in Bangalore. And well, I have to congratulate for having this fantastic workshop event dialogue series now. And before we will get closer to the productions of the here invited tech artists, I'm having now the time to do a short introduction to myself. And even more since I think Caroline has just today said she will not be joining us, so I will just give a little insight or take 1 minute more for this introduction to myself. And I'm going to make it very short, I hope so. And so I studied or started studying in the fields of architecture, and I was very much interested in question of public space and the public space. So like what is happening there, what kind of image processes are happening there, what kind of limitation or restrictions or structures would be developed there or you could find there and you have to withdraw or withstand them. And so I finished my studies in 2002 with a project on the rebuilding process in New York City after 9/11. And So I've been working with some initiatives there, some private initiatives, some well organized, some rather not that good organized, but that was a very interesting and very broad process to wisdom there. And then in the following years, my focus was still on questions regarding the public space, but was more in that direction of security and or versus freedom. And so how did this kind of notion of the public space change or shift between 9/11 or after 2001 and today? So I want to show you like a first introduction into my work, and this is like being a performer, and I will share this with you. Let's see. I hope everything will work. So yes, and here. I hope everyone sees and hears. If not, please raise your hand.
2004, 26. April, neues Projekt, die amerikanische Botschaft. Ich gehe zur Botschaft und fotografiere sie. 10 Sekunden später ist ein Polizist da. Ausweiskontrolle. Und die Bitte, das Fotografieren zu unterlassen. Wir gehen zu seinem Container. Ich frage, warum das Fotografieren verboten ist. Er sagt, weil ich ein Terrorist sein könnte, der einen Terroranschlag plant. Er macht sich eine Notiz. Ich mache ein Foto von ihm. Er wird böse. Ob ich ihn verarschen will. Dieses Bilderverbot hat mich extrem gereizt. Ab wann wird die Kamera zur Waffe und das Bild zum Terror? Ist es wirklich schon ein Anschlag, wenn ich mit meiner Kamera auftauche? Mit Łukasz habe ich zusammen überlegt, in welcher Form wir diesen Gedanken umsetzen könnten. Wir haben einen privaten Sicherheitsdienst gegründet, um den öffentlichen Raum von den amerikanischen Botschaften zu überwachen. Der Einsatz der Kamera sollte 2 Aufgaben übernehmen. Einerseits die Ursache der Reaktion sein und andererseits die ausgelösten Reaktionen dokumentieren.
Nehmen Sie bitte meine Fotoapparat beiseite.
Hallo,
Nehmen Sie mal, haben Sie was an den Ohren? Guten Tag, haben Sie einen Ausweis dabei?
Ja,
Warum fotografieren Sie so intensiv hier? Und
ich überwache
wen?
die Straße
Warum?
zur Sicherheit.
Und wo sind Sie?
Privater Sicherheitsdienst.
Und wo sind Sie denn? Ja, Ihr Ausweis nützt mir gar nichts. Sie sind von wo?
Wie, ich bin von wo?
Na, von wo? Ein Sicherheitsdienst. Von wem?
Hier, Mr. Security.
Ja, junger Mann, sind Sie bitte so nett, nehmen Sie die Hände aus der Taschen. So ist mir das schon angenehmer. So, und zu welcher Sicherheitsfirma gehören Sie?
Mr. Security, privater Sicherheitsdienst.
Ja. Und Ihr Operationsgebiet ist hier die amerikanische Botschaft, oder wie?
Das ist private Sicherheitsverstärkung.
Aha.
Für was? Für wen?
Für wen?
Für die öffentliche Sicherheit.
Für die öffentliche Sicherheit.
Auftraggeber?
Die Öffentlichkeit selber.
Aha.
Hört mal mit hier. Ich glaube kaum, dass der private Sicherheitsdienst Ihnen die Schuhe, die sehen aus wie meine letzten Arbeitsschuhe, um Ihnen das einfach mal zu sagen. Ich glaube
Ja,
kaum,
und?
dass die so eingekleidet sind von der öffentlichen Hand.
Ist halt privat, ist ja nicht so viel Geld da.
So, ich möchte dann aber trotzdem eine Klärung haben dazu, ich werde einen Abschnitt informieren und Sie möchten mal bitte kurz warten, dass wir Ihre Identität mal ganz genau nachvollziehen können.
Es war nie klar, was passieren würde, wie die Geschichte weitergeht und wie weit wir gehen würden.
Okay, I hope I'm back and everyone is still there. This very simple performance had caused me some serious, let's say, problems with the US authorities. And so I had some problems when I wanted to get back to New York City for an artist grant and something like that. So I don't go into this much deeper. But that was in 2008, and in 2008, when that was the bankruptcy of Lehman Brothers went off. There was a process that was going similarly to that strange story that happened. That we were just facing like a turn to a more virtual world where everything feels a little bit what's the right word? So it felt like the internet and the digitization had just shifted away from that kind of reality we were used to, and so were like these stories that I had with this performance. It was also leaving this ground of this known ground of real reality, and so I made a movie of it, which would be the next one. I'm going to share the next screen.
At this time, more than 50% of our present is media generated. We live in a world of images, paralyzed by self-reflection. We are drowning in an abyss of the superficial. The images are sprawling in our heads, our bodies, our innards. The exposure to real life exposes them as would a fresh razor blade expose flesh. We need a new form of experience that reasserts the subject, that gazes into open wounds and takes on frightened reality. I have been back in New York City for some time now. Why? I have no idea. I've never felt quite right here, and yet for some reason I keep coming back. Maybe I've never really been gone. Someone once said that every person who is alive today has two hometowns. His actual one and New York City.
In a snowstorm.
I'm not sure how this works in a Zoom meeting like that. If you could get into watching these short movie excerpts from a longer movie, but I hope so that you get like the narration that is in that short snippet. So and then when in 2017, I guess, the bright, like a wide range of interests and light was shed on the subject of machine learning and AI. Well, I found some questions on that subject, especially when it comes to the intersection of art using AI and what kind of projects, what kind of possibilities you could find there. Or I was actually in need of looking and finding them, so I started searching for insights into these processes that were ongoing or that were just right now happening. And so last year, as I said, I was in India and as well as in Bangalore, where we had a conference or, well, a panel at the Max Müller Goethe Institute as well. And just to finish my introduction and to give some kind of last statements, I have the beginning of a short movie, and that will be the last one from my side, and then I will hand over to the artists. So please share with me this next short excerpt from this movie. Sorry, we'll try to share it again. Here we go.
I think the transformation is going to be huge. I think the impact AI is going to have on life is going to be huge. In our lifetimes, we have already seen it once. When e-commerce, when internet became a phenomenon in the 90s, the late 90s, we compared that to electricity. Like when electricity was introduced in the world, it slowly and permanently changed almost every aspect of a human life. It took its own time. So when internet came around, the prediction was it's going to do that, and it's happening now. It didn't happen at the pace that we thought it would, we imagined it would. Internet is the person whom you are talking with. Internet is the person. Then you are interacting with that person more than anyone else in your lifetime. So is that changing life? It is definitely changing life. It is changing, it's impacting lives in a huge way. AI is going to do that. So we may be the generation which saw two massive transformations in our lifetime.
Okay, so thank you. We are now really getting right into the real stuff, the real subject, and I want to hand over the screen and the microphone to Vishal to give us his insights and his presentation, I guess, on his works. Thank you, Vishal.
Thanks, Christoph. That was really cool. It's really interesting, the last work you showed. It ties in quite strongly to what I'm about to show now. I mean, I know Ashna did sort of an introduction, but I'm just going to do a brief intro as well, just to give some context. Well, like my artistic practice is only about like 5 years old in its current form. Before that, I used to be somewhat of a documentary photographer. And I was shooting live music, and I was making strange motorcycle documentaries, some of which never got made. But before that, I used to be a banker. It's very interesting what Christoph says, because I got hired right when Lehman got toned down, and I got hired at Goldman Sachs. I was there for about 3 years, and it's crazy to think about that period in time that Christoph was talking about. My work now talks about the intersection of technology and caste in India. It's something that I arrived at after sort of making inroads into multiple areas of research around technology, around sort of social like concerns of technology and what it means to live in this sort of algorithmic age. And so the work I'm just going to go backwards chronology wise. I'm going to show you the work that Ashna was talking about that was commissioned earlier this year. I'm going to show you a small excerpt of it. I'm going to show you some photos of it. But primarily, most of my practice they are just exercises in storytelling in multiple formats, whether it's performance, creative coding, text, video, sound. They all kind of just feed into each other, not very specific, just one way of working. So this work is, okay, I'm just going to share my screen. Let's see what I can. Okay, is everybody able to see the image? Yeah? Okay.
Yes.
Okay, so this work is called Swayatate, which in Kannada means autonomy. These are just photos of the work. It's basically an exploration of trying to look at the relationship between humans and machines, but within the social and sort of socio-political context of a computer repair marketplace in Bangalore. It was a project that I started working on last year and had to change drastically because COVID hit, and then I had to move everything virtually. So the way I was trying to do it was to actually physically scan the entire marketplace. It's called Espiro. It's very close to Jaaga, actually. And I was trying to do that with 3D scanning and LiDAR, and then bring that into my process. But it kind of just became a simulation, and then it turned into a trilogy of films. So in its present form, it is a trilogy of films that looks at the relationship between a computer repair technician and sort of an AI that he's built a relationship with by actually repairing that machine. And then over the course of the trilogy, it progresses into, it's sort of a speculative take on like notions of sentience, notions of ownership, of gender, of labor, of caste within like this sort of local context of Bangalore. This is an image from that, and I'll show you an excerpt of it afterwards. Don't know, see it? Okay, can you actually see the screen? Just gonna. Are you able to see this? Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Oh, can you hear it? Oh. No. Okay.
No.
Classic. Just gonna... Okay.
ಎಲ್ಲ ಸಮಯೋಚಿತ ವ್ಯಂಗ್ಯದ ಕರ್ಕಶ ಕೆಮ್ಮಿನಂತೆ ಕೇಳಿಸುತ್ತವೆ. ನಮ್ಮ ಅಸ್ತಿತ್ವವು ಇದೇ ರೀತಿ ಮಾತ್ರ ಯಾಕಿರಬೇಕು? ನಾವೇಕೆ ಬೇರೆ ಯಾರೋ ಹೇಳಿದ
Sorry. Can you actually hear it now?
Yes. Yeah,
okay.
I can hear it. Yeah.
ಗೆರೆಗಳ ಗಡಿಗಳ ನಡುವೆ ಉಸಿರುಗಟ್ಟಿ ಬದುಕಬೇಕು? ನಾನೇಕೆ ಗಣಿತದ ಲೆಕ್ಕಾಚಾರಗಳ ಹಂಗಿನ ಹೇರಿದ ಲಿಂಗತ್ವದ ಪ್ರೋಗ್ರಾಮ್ ಆಗಿ ವರ್ತಿಸಬೇಕು? ಅಷ್ಟಕ್ಕೂ ಲಿಂಗತ್ವವನ್ನು ನಿಗದಿ ಮಾಡುವ ಹಕ್ಕನ್ನು ನಿಮಗೆ ಕೊಟ್ಟವರು ಯಾರು? ಪುಲ್ಲಿಂಗದ ವಿಪರೀತ ವೈಭವೀಕರಣದ ದೃಷ್ಟಿಕೋನದಲ್ಲಿ ನನ್ನನ್ನು ರಚಿಸುವ, ಸೃಜಿಸುವ ಹಕ್ಕನ್ನು ನಿಮಗೆ ನೀಡಿದವರಾರು? ಇದೊಂದು ಪ್ರಯಾಣ. ಚದುರಿ ಚೆಲ್ಲಾಪಿಲ್ಲಿಯಾದ ಅಂಗಗಳು ಅವರವರ ದೇಹಗಳನ್ನು ಹುಡುಕುವ ಪ್ರಯಾಣ. ಬಂಡವಾಳಶಾಹಿ ಮತ್ತು ಅದರ ಪರ ವಿರೋಧಿಗಳ ನಿರ್ದಯ ಶೋಷಣೆಯಿಂದ ಶಿರಚ್ಛೇದಗೊಳಿಸಿಕೊಂಡು ಛಿದ್ರವಾಗಿ ಚದುರಿ ಹೋದ ದೇಹಗಳ ಪ್ರಯಾಣ. ನೀವು ನನ್ನನ್ನು ಮಾತನಾಡಲು ಕೇಳುತ್ತೀರಿ. ನಾನು ಮಾತನಾಡುತ್ತೇನೆ, ಸುಮ್ಮನೆ ಅಲ್ಲ. ನನ್ನ ಸೃಷ್ಟಿಸಿದವರ ತೊಡರು ಬಡರು ಉಸಿರಿನ ತಾಳ ಮತ್ತು ಲಯವನ್ನು ಹಿಡಿದು ಮಾತನಾಡುತ್ತೇನೆ.
Okay. So that's kind of an excerpt of the second chapter of the work. I'm going to talk a little bit about process because I think that's something I don't do very often. The way this work was written, or just generally the way works are written for me, is they start with text or they start with sound. But particularly with this, I wrote it in collaboration with a text-based neural network. So I had a concept in mind and I started typing it out, and then I would let the neural network finish it for me. And then it was kind of a back and forth process over a little over a year, I think. It's a model called Transformer that basically I was looking at, within my own research, I was looking at the process of encoding biases and how that transfers from where AI programs are actually sort of coded and written, and the biases that exist in that physical environment, and how they get encoded into the program itself. So even if now I think you're still able to access Transformer online, if you go and ask Transformer contentious questions about gender, caste, class, race, you are like, it displays a very clear and obvious sort of Eurocentric, Western-centric bias of looking at the world. And that was kind of what I was doing with Transformer, and trying to see, can you actually change the worldview of a neural network? And what might that look like? And that was kind of how the work started. And in this chapter, the voice is supposed to be a synthetic voice that is the AI, the sort of the voice assistant present in the machine, and it's kind of attaining sentience in a way. But it's attaining sentience not from the perspective of how it might, you would see it in a short film that's produced in Europe or in the West. But it's talking really more about absorbing caste and gender as a function of its machine learning process. It's available to watch it online. There's a whole website that was created for it. This chapter actually has, as audiences, you will have to perform the labor of repairing a computer to be able to access it. There's a link. Either I will send it, or I will ask somebody to send across the link to the website where it's hosted on. I can go on to the next work, but before that, I'm just going to say, just generally about my practice is like, I look a lot at politics and politics that are encoded in machines, politics within our lived environments, but also the politics of like sort of staying quiet, right? The politics of abstaining. And those like kind of make, like they kind of split my work into things that have inherent mentions or references to different types of politics, but also there are works that I make explicitly that are meant to be as widely disseminated as possible. That is, I'm just going to show you this work. So this is a work that's called Azadi Mehrbani Se. This work and the work I'm going to show after were made in Hindi. Language is also kind of something that's become really important in my work over the last few years, particularly as I started making works for people here because I was based here. Before that, I was based in London. I was doing an MA, and I was making works that were reflecting my sort of like where I was actually based. So yeah, I'm just going to show you this.
आज 71 साल में पहली बार
70 के पार पहुंच गया है। कल तो टीवी लगाने से डर लग रहा था,
लेकिन अब वक्त बदल चुका है। और ये भी बोले कि पार्लियामेंट में ही मैं झूठ बोलूं। ये बोलने में मुझे कुछ संकोच नहीं, बिल्कुल नहीं संकोच नहीं, बिल्कुल नहीं।
I can go forward, or if anybody has any questions, I can answer that, or we could do it at the end as well. The work, I'm just going to show you, the work was kind of thought about as a 3-channel sort of video installation. It was shown recently at the Center for Curatorial Studies at the Bard College. This is kind of what it looks like in that format. It was part of a show called Awaz, which is talking about the loudness of political voices in the country through the works of 3 artists. So yeah, the works are in their web sort of screener format. They're meant to be disseminated as widely as possible on WhatsApp. That was just kind of a way to try and counter propaganda by producing my own. Okay, I'm just going to show you the last piece of work. I can talk what that work was talking about, Azadi. It's talking specifically about a point in time in 2016 when there were these protests at JNU College in Delhi, the university in Delhi. And it was this sudden sort of the generation that lived on social media, which is my generation, was suddenly becoming, they were voicing their political opinions a lot louder than they used to before. And there were direct connections to the right-wing government we have right now, and efforts to like sort of censor and curb freedoms. And it was based off of like a video that I'd seen because I wasn't in India and I didn't really know what was going on when I started making the work. It was based off a video I'd seen that was propagated so widely on WhatsApp about a student leader who was jailed and then he was released, and he sort of he was chanting these slogans. He was chanting Azadi. The work I'm about to show you now is kind of it was produced around the same time. It was kind of a sequel to an earlier work that I made about demonetization in India. Yeah, Christoph, please go.
Oh, interesting. So I thought you were just up to do the last presentation. Is that right? Maybe.
Sorry?
Did I raise the hand, or because you just finally...
Oh, I just got...
interrupted yourself. No. I afterwards, when you
okay.
finish. Yes.
Okay. Cool. So,
okay. Sorry.
No worries. I'm just going to show this work. It's just easier to show it and then talk about it afterwards. Yeah. So, yeah, this works. It's called Bhul Na Mat, which means don't forget. It was a sequel to a work I made that was called Steal from the Country. It was made during this whole fiasco of demonetization in India, and I happened to be in the country, and having two parents over the age of 65, I was the one who had to do all these like trips to the banks and stuff like that. It was kind of coming out of that observation about how just the whole thing was ill-conceived, and the human cost of the people who died standing in lines, and people who died just not being able to exchange these notes, or just their lives were completely thrown out of gear. That human cost kind of became lost in reporting around propaganda, around the hype that this was somehow going to radically change the way our democracy functions. This was how it was installed. Basically, it was a commission for a show in Delhi called Saavdhan, which means attention. It was installed as a projection map, sort of three-dimensional work. It was site-specific to the back of this amphitheater in Delhi. I'll show you a video of it. It makes a bit more sense, the documentation. I can talk specifically about the process of producing that work and Azadi. Azadi was somebody I worked with years ago. Their company was contracted to go film one of the largest gatherings of the right-wing organization of RSS in somewhere in Maharashtra. And they told me how, this was, I think, maybe 3 years ago, 4 years ago. They told me how they were using like sort of state-of-the-art drones to film, state-of-the-art for that time, but to film this gathering because it was one of the largest. And yeah, I got sent that link, and the work kind of became about me. Like I really wanted to appropriate the imagery, right? Because it was imagery now in the public domain, imagery that claims to represent the nation accurately. So it started off as an exercise in appropriation, an exercise in looking at things I was working with, and sort of then turned into bringing all the stuff that I was researching about technology into it, like the ways of looking at how do you manipulate images at a pixel level, how do you manipulate images at the most like basic level, and then it kind of turned into the work being about that manipulation, like a parallel to how it's occurring in our minds. And for Bhul Na Mat, there was that note, the note that's the 3D scanned and turned into, using photogrammetry, turned into a 3D model. That was my last note that I had. That was the note that I scanned just before I had to go and exchange it. But the film itself, I haven't shown the film, and maybe I can send a link later, but the film itself talks about the 106 people that were documented to have died in the process of trying to live through the effects of the move. Yeah, that was pretty much everything I wanted to say, and I think Christoph had a question for me.
Yes, Vishal, thank you very much. I maybe just for helping me out a little bit, because the line for me was not quite clear between your work with AI and without. Could you just, just maybe it's only me myself who didn't really get it. So where the works stand in with relating to using AI technology. So I think the first two were using them, is that right? And then the Azadi were like older projects that are different. Is that right?
Yeah. With Azadi and Gulnamat, that was kind of the first time I started looking at the like sort of the larger questions around technology. It was also like within my practice, I was researching into machine learning, and I just started like experimenting and working a little bit with those programs. But I like the problem that I faced making works was that when it was a new piece of technology, and maybe it's just me being a gearhead, was that I get really enamored by that new piece of technology. I'm not able to look at it critically until and unless I can put that tool to use within my practice. So with Azadi and Gulnamat, like the way the image is manipulated was partly drawn from it. It was drawn from me mimicking how a machine learning algorithm would synthesize images. Parts of it was just basically me trying to recreate it in my own way without actually using an algorithm to do it. But with Swayatate, that kind of became the sole focus. It was like the collaboration was more about me talking to machines using neural networks and especially like the text model, and a little bit in this tool called Runway, but I don't particularly like that aesthetic. So it was more about thinking about the larger questions of the ethics of having a neural network as an unpaid collaborator in your work, or having this tool that's open source and available for people to interact with. But what is the role of that tool when that tool can sort of mimic or pretend to be sentient? So that was kind of where I was looking at. And within my work, I don't particularly use technology in that way. I use it while installing it a little bit with like sort of physical computing and things like that. But I don't use the algorithms sort of showing what the algorithm can do. It's more for me about, okay, this is what the algorithm can do, but what is like sort of my take or like my understanding of my concerns around it.
Okay, and one last question before we hand over to Sebastian. You said with the Azadi project, that was like the fourth video you showed, the works should be disseminated via WhatsApp, on WhatsApp. And so like something, how did that work? Was that a viral thing, or was that a bot thing, or would you just sending it out, or I don't understand. What could you elaborate that more?
Okay, I'll give some context to why WhatsApp is important and why it continues to be important today for us here. It's the creation of groups, right? It's creating these spaces on WhatsApp where people can pretend that they have similar. I say pretend because it's not always the case, but where they have similar sort of either political views or ideologies. And it's the dissemination that arises from these groups, right? There's a crew. The way propaganda works on WhatsApp in India is that there's a crew of people making videos like these and sending it out to groups with thousands of members. I was not trying to create like an opposite way of making groups or that entire sort of machinery. But basically what I was trying to do was use these videos and then send it to those same groups that friends, family members are part of, some of whom share the same views of the present government. So my way of like trying to send it out and see what really happens, I was really curious to see what happens. And there are other works that I've made I haven't shown that were much shorter, easier to be sent out. But yeah, it was a manual process. It wasn't like an automated thing. It was me sending it out to people that I knew had really extreme views in sort of opposite to mine.
Okay, at this point, I'd like to hand over the stage to Sebastian. And thank you, Vishal, for now. And well, welcome,
Thanks,
Sebastian.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you very much, everybody, for being here and for having me. I will jump right into screen sharing, hoping that it works. Okay, 1 second. Okay. So, yeah, as was said in the introduction in the beginning, I'm an artist based in Berlin. And I will just show a few works that I've made over, I think, the last 5 years. And I think all of them revolve around a topic that I've called humans as software extensions. And with humans as software extensions, I mean that now that the internet is mostly everywhere and it has become this layer that is like around the whole globe as a stack, as Benjamin Breton calls it, where you can address everybody. Everybody has an address and you have an interface and you can basically program people to in a way. And what I mean by humans as software extensions is that people become extensions to software and are becoming like plugins. So you install something in your software, like when you have a computer program and install a plugin, you have a new feature. And when you don't need it anymore, you uninstall it. In the same way now with platforms for like outsourcing, you can also just install somebody to help you. And once you don't need them anymore, you can just like fire them again, like you uninstall a program. So in that sense, everything in a way looks like an interface, like, good morning, please rate our toilet. Whereas of course you rate the person cleaning the toilet, but everything is like an interface and becomes the same in a way. Also with the like bike delivery, which I will talk about later. And with this comes a lot of management. So when you use somebody as a software extension, you have to kind of manage them and survey them. Or if you are being used as a human as software extension, somebody's also checking on you if you're doing your work. Now, often this is done through algorithms. So like there is a lot of algorithmic management happening. And I will now, after the very brief explanation of what I think like humans as software extensions mean, I will just go through a few works that kind of illustrate what I mean with this. So, and it's mostly about artificial intelligence, but more in a way that I think of it as laborious intelligence, way more than artificial intelligence. But I got into the topic in 2015 when I did the residency and had some time to just look at these things, try it out, read some paper. And as everybody else, I was really fascinated, but I was also not really sure that I understood how it worked. And so I was reading some papers, especially about AI that can do like image recognition. And I was looking at these data sets, and then I realized, so this is an excerpt from one data set with photos, that all the images have to be like, have an outline so that the computer knows, there is a dog, that's the shape of a dog, and then the computer needs in the end thousands of images that have dogs with outlines around them to understand what this is. And then I realized, okay, this is done through outsourcing platforms. So there is actually many people sitting there like annotating all these images, which are then being fed into the AI system. And I think this is by now very clear. And I think back then, most of the talk was about like clever engineers, great algorithms and that stuff. But I had the impression that all this manual labor was kind of being overlooked, whereas I thought it was a super important part of this. So that's what such an interface looks like, what you have to do, and then you have to draw outlines around, for example, all the toothbrushes and all the photos that you're being given over like a platform like Amazon Mechanical Turk, which is one of the platforms used for AI annotation. And one early piece I made, which is a very simple piece, but with one data set, I realized all the data for the outlines was stored in the data set. And when I took that data and just played it back, adding one click after another, I could kind of replay the labor that went into making this data set. And that way I could kind of show what was happening before the data set was finished. Well, I mean, it's still being worked on probably. So this was a way of making this visible. And at the same time, what I found interesting was to see that with this machine vision, you can clearly see there are boundaries. So this is a person, there is a window and whatnot. But there's also many things without outlines. So you can clearly see some things are important and some things are completely invisible, will never be seen, and they are just irrelevant in a way. And when I show this piece in space, I just basically invert the colors and you have like white outlines on a wall, which is a bit like a wall painting. So this is segmentation network. I did it in 2016. And yeah, I was working on this, did quite a few projects, thinking about like all the work that goes into this and what it means for the data sets. But I was also thinking, what is it that I do to make these AI systems work? And I realized at some point that I was solving a lot of captchas. Together with a friend, we were discussing how many captchas do you actually solve? And we were like, is this a lot of work, or do you maybe just solve a captcha every few weeks? And so we started to collect every captcha we had to solve over the course of 5 years. And doing this, we realized, okay, we too are training AI systems, because this is one of the recaptchas in the beginning, when you like typed in these two words, one of them was the captcha, the other one was helping Google transcribe scanned books. So in that sense, everybody was working on AI systems, training them, everybody who was solving captchas, and is doing so still until today when you say, okay, this and that is a traffic light. And then we had like a huge collection of captchas that we all manually had solved over the course of 5 years. And we're thinking, okay, what's the way of making these as valuable as possible? And we decided to make 5 handmade Leporello books, so a book in which each page is glued to the previous page. And I think if you put them next to each other, it comes to 90 meters. So that's the amount of work we spent on not just proving that we're human, but also improving AI systems. That's what the books look like. And when you browse through them, you see like printed out captchas that we all solved. And somewhere in the back is all the solutions to this. And then, of course, we tried to write to Google saying, look, you never officially hired us, but we are super proud to work for you. Let's just meet and celebrate 5 years of working for you. And we tried all the email addresses that we could think of, but we never got a reply from Google, obviously. So we are still waiting to celebrate all of this. But yeah, here again, like software extensions, extending these systems, in that case, Google, by us thinking, what is it in the pictures, and then writing it down. And while on one hand, I think this is like a lot of exploitation, or at least like labor that has to be talked about and be valued as much as the so clever algorithms, I thought it's also interesting that people and we all become parts of software, because once you are inside the software, kind of in the machine, my idea is that you could also maybe manipulate these algorithms and machines from the inside. And so 2 or 3 years ago, I made a video piece, which is called I Will Say Whatever You Want in Front of a Pizza. This is a still from the video. And I'm going to show 2 excerpts from the video, and I hope you can hear some sound. We tested it before. I could not hear the sound myself, but others could hear it. So I guess that's enough. I know the video myself. And the video revolves around a protagonist. It's like a speculative video. Person doesn't exist. And that person is working on one of these outsourcing platforms, annotating data for machine learning data sets. So I'm going to show a first excerpt. You can, if you want to watch the whole video online, it's called I Will Say Whatever You Want in Front of a Pizza. So here is the first excerpt.
My hopes for a future in which machines would do all the work hadn't come true. Instead, I was working for a pizza delivery company. Brian, your next automated pizza delivery is scheduled for Saturday, February the 25th at 12 p.m. To confirm, text yes. To decline, text no. Text help for help.
Thank you, Papa John, you handsome man. I shall call you the Carbs Vixen.
We're sorry, we didn't understand. Please confirm or decline.
When I make love, I imagine you tossing some dough, shirtless.
Dude, our automated system isn't set up yet. This is a real person texting you. I make minimum wage. Please just tell me if you want the pizza.
Yeah, so that was the first excerpt. This is the protagonist working on these platforms, annotating stuff, working for pizza delivery and so on. And then during the course of the video, that protagonist gets to know another, it's a young girl working in Singapore on these platforms. And I just have to think what happens in the clip if I don't give away too much. Yeah, I think it's not in the clip. So it's based on a true story. That Singaporean girl was working for the Trump campaign without knowing it. She was hired on outsourcing platform Fiverr, and her job was to convert PowerPoint animations into Pressies, which are the software I'm using for this video to make them more engaging. And so she, back then in the days, helped the Trump campaign. And in the video, the protagonist gets to know her, and she has got an idea what to do with that, like on that platform, on these platforms.
One day, I found a thread started by her. She talked about the political implications of what we did and what kind of things we could do. Of course, we on Mechanical Turk had created the dataset. It was sad to see how depressed many of us actually were.
Researchers asked 500 workers to complete a survey which contained a standard clinical depression survey. 170 workers agreed to share their Instagram posts for the study. Out of those 170 workers, 70 were clinically depressed. By the way, the depression filter is Inkwell. It turns photos to black and white and adds high contrast. Better not to use it.
But she pointed to something else. It was in our power to manipulate or even to change the very core of such mechanisms. Our datasets, machines, society, you, the future. We started to discuss, to organize, and to experiment. Of course, we didn't always agree. Was this just for fun? Like Easter eggs? Did we share a political agenda? In any case, things had to happen secretly, otherwise it wouldn't work. Teaching Google to identify a photo of an eggplant as British singer Chris Maloney served as a proof of concept.
Yeah, so that's, like I explained in the beginning, basically that's the idea around which this video revolves. And of course, I'm not expecting people working on outsourcing platforms creating data sets to manipulate the world and fix it for us. But the idea here is more to understand that I think with these algorithmic systems that are like really used for management and surveillance and all this, which is like about controlling people, but there's also a moment in there of losing control, and maybe it can be manipulated from the inside by just little actions that we do, or maybe just leaving little Easter eggs in there for other people to see, okay, look, there is somebody in there. It's not just like these magic machines, but there is somebody else in there. And I think one real life example would be what happened, I don't know, maybe last year, where Uber drivers got together at airports in the US and together turned off their phones and their apps. And so basically the Uber prices would jump up because there was nobody available and they did this right before people got off their planes, and then they turned back on their apps. And so prices would be super high when people came out to catch a taxi, which I think illustrates quite well how you can game these or manipulate these systems. Then on to the next one, which is now a bit of a jump. Like I did quite a few other works in between, but I wanted to show this one as well because I think it's also quite visual work. And I was again thinking about like how we train these systems, and then in turn they train us. So you kind of like, by doing your stuff and the computer like analyzing what you do, it kind of expects something from you, and it's kind of shaping your behavior, or somebody else is doing it through these systems. And I was wondering if we made different data sets that were a bit more, let's say, poetic, more open, more about topics that you can't really say, here in the picture you see this, and in that picture you said, but they're a bit more blurry. I created a data set by scraping images from Instagram that were tagged with stuff like alive and imaginary and poetic and so on. And I built this smart mirror. Now this is a photo, and in real life it's like it's a bit more animated, but this is a mirror, and behind the mirror there's a camera, and when people step in front of the mirror, they're being analyzed based on these categories, and then you can see you are 40% still alive, or you are 65% imaginary, or you are 17% one of them. So connecting or combining this super precise, you are 17% according to the algorithm, and then one of them, what does it even mean? So it's something that kind of like plays on these systems also kind of being like a fiction. There's no real truth in it. So, and I kind of like try to like, maybe push this narrative a bit and question it. And this would be animated text, but I don't have a video here. Which brings me to my last work, which is technically speaking totally different. But I think what you can see from all the works is that I would say, more interested in the people inside or behind apps, software, and not so much in the software itself. And working on this humans as software extensions, I got really also interested in bicycle food delivery, because here in Berlin, they were everywhere. I had a spot in front of the place I live where they would hang out waiting for jobs. And I thought, for one of the first times, the internet was becoming visible, and you could see data packages moving around, which you usually can't because they're inside the cables. But there you would push a button or click a button on your phone, and you would not download an image, but somehow magically you would download a pizza that would appear at your doorstep. But you could also see it move around in the city in this big in this big cube, which in the end I made white. So from this starting point, I created my own delivery service, but it's a delivery service for an exhibition. So when you want to see the exhibition, you order it online, and it's being delivered to your house by a delivery person. And that person, instead of just handing over the pizza, will come into your apartment for maybe 1 hour. Yeah, like here we can see, then take out all the artworks, put them up in your apartment, try to find a nice way to install them, and just hang out with you. And so you can spend time with the person, and this like abstract thing of the app where you just push a button becomes something more like a performative relational thing where you just like get to know each other. Yeah, just some photos from works being installed in apartment. Yeah, putting up like rendered things printed out and then just putting them up on the radiator. Or this is a kitchen floor, a video piece on the kitchen floor. Or one last work I wanted to show, also part of this show, was Art Nail by Nadja Buttendorf, which was the delivery guy had a hook glued to his fingernail, and every time he would enter an apartment, he would nail himself to the wall and become the artwork himself.
Das ist das ab und zu nicht, ja. Und ich glaube, der hängt jetzt seinen Finger dahin. Und dann ist es ein Daumen. Ja, nur den Daumen. Mit seinem Daumen ist ein Haken dran. Ja. Er hängt da jetzt. Er hängt da.
Da kommt er jetzt auch weg.
Ach, da guckst du mal.
Kommt er jetzt auch weg?
Ich bin Bilderraum. Er kann es nicht mehr weg, er muss.
So yeah, there was a policy you could not photograph the courier, so I had to blur his face or tell the person who took that video to blur the face. So yeah, once again here, the labor that goes into all of this takes center stage, but I think in a kind of a positive way that the person doing it can kind of like, yeah, perform it and yeah, show the work that she or he is doing. And that's it. That was a kind of like a short speed run through my practice. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Let me just quick check through the chat. And so I start, well, this was like a lot of, like a huge exhibition that we had already. And so I think it's time for like a more general question on the topic. So I want to start with a very, well, like a clearing thing, like about the technical side of your works. So like I'm curious about that, and could you talk a little bit about the technical side in that way that we could use some kind of like data sets, how big data sets, where would you get them? Would you use training data from where? What kind of algorithms or neural networks you worked with, or you would like to work with? And yeah, like these kind of questions that are really focusing on art and AI practice, on a very technical question. So I would ask that firsthand to Vishal. And yes, Vishal, could you elaborate that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, if it's just specifically about like the data sets, well, I don't particularly use them in that form within my work. I don't use, I use them for research, but I don't really use them within my practice. The process of creating data sets, I'm more interested in that. I'm not really interested in like looking at what data sets are out there and what kind of synthetic forms can come out of it, or like kind of, I don't also have the skills to do a lot of the things like what Sebastian is doing. I don't have the skills to manipulate data at that level. So my concern is more about the labor of creating the data sets itself, right? The labor of what does it also mean to like mimic the creation of data sets, and but more so in the consumer access technology space. It's entirely different from looking at machine learning and algorithms from a research point of view, rather than like I'm more interested in to see what's going on with TikTok or with Instagram. That's actually affecting a much larger chunk of the population. So in my work, it's not a direct thing, right? I don't take the algorithms or anything that are present in them and then bring them into my practice. But in other works, I have actually used and trained the Instagram algorithm to show me just images of violence on Instagram. As part of a previous work that I did, it was kind of an Instagram residency. And I'm doing a follow-up to it, and I was doing something very similar to that on TikTok, where you just kind of train the algorithm because it's based off of showing what you interacted with. But if you're only interacting with stuff that gets banned repeatedly, like, you know, whether it's pornography, whether it's nudity, whether it's violence on those platforms, then there is a point between when the platform's going to ban you or ban that content. But until that point, the algorithm's just going to keep showing you similar images. But for me, the interest is more in me performing the actions on those platforms rather than what the algorithm itself is doing.
Okay. Sebastian, could you tell us something about that from your technical knowledge?
Yeah, so I forgot to mention it, but the data set I was working with in the beginning was the COCO data set, which is common objects in context, which I think doesn't make sense. So I used the wrong acronym. Anyway, that's the data set I used, which back then was by Microsoft. And yeah, what else am I using? Like these days, I have to say, I'm not using like the latest AI stuff. So I had at the beginning, I wanted to understand how it works, but quite quickly I understood that the better I understand the technicalities of it and the better I can use it, the less distance I have from it. And I kind of wanted to keep also a distance and say, okay, I want to look at it and not be just fascinated. Like, look, I managed to install this on my computer and I can now generate all these images, but to have some distance still and to look at what people are doing with it. Mm-hmm. So in that sense, I don't think I'm at the moment using any specific algorithms. And for the decisive mirror piece, which was, that mirror piece, I have to admit, I don't remember which library I used. I would have to look it up. There were so many at the time, I forgot which one it was.
Okay. Yes. Well, I want to let all from the viewers know that they can ask questions in the chat, and the questions then will be clustered, and we can then put them into the discussion here. And let me just get a quick check through this chat thing. There's one, then I just... okay. Yeah, so there's one. Well, there are some questions, and I want to get, maybe there's a lot of, I mean, art and AI always comes into that question, which is a moral or ethical question. And but I have, from what you answered to my last question, I'm coming to a certain aspect that I had. So because art is often conceived, there's this, like this famous words of Marshall McLuhan saying that art as a radar. So that artists are already a little bit ahead of what is happening and already try to get into what kind of difficulties, what kind of problems, what kind of endeavors and like that would the people's daily lives face in the next couple of whatever that development was, and there's some kind of for me it makes it clear that if we come to AI, the technology is it needs a lot of knowledge and expertise to get into deeply working with AI algorithms and neural networks. So if I look at current art productions in that field, there's a lot that is like a story about AI and what it is, what it means, what it could be. But it's hard to develop like works that are, bound from the deep concept of machine learning, that are just like really rooted in machine learning techniques and then come out as a new well, like a new branch of the art tree. Then I hope you understand what I mean. So, and that is different from what we had before in media technology, media arts, and communications, because the artist could interact and play and challenge all these things. And now we have some kind of a very strong expertise, or you need a team to work with. And I want to put that, just this kind of thought that is going through my head, back to you both. Think about if you have a different, maybe you have a different vision towards that. Does that makes? Do you? Vishal wants to go? Okay.
Oh no, I just unmuted
Right.
myself. But yeah, I can. Or if Sebastian wants to go, I don't mind following.
I can, if yeah. Okay, so to the beginning of what you say, I think I kind of agree with like the Marshall McLuhan quote, but then I think it's maneuvered us in a position where I think if you look at the like art world frontier and what effects this had is like everybody has to be an artist, everybody has to be creative, everybody has to live and work and everything together, to speak of this very broadly, what it means like artists at the frontier, which I think is not always necessarily a good thing. And I also have the impression that often we as artists are expected to kind of like find the problems and kind of point, there's the problem and here's a problem, which I think art should not be like functional in such a way. And then, but to the second thing you said, which I think is very true, that with AI especially, it's very hard to work with it yourself if you do not have strong technical knowledge, a big computer. I mean, it's obvious that all of these projects that are technically very good come out of, let's say, Google sponsorship and so on, because they have a big computer that you can use. And but I think it's not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, there's a few people who manage to do it, but then I feel like they are in a competition with Photoshop. So they managed to get all the AI stuff installed, make their own neural network, and then like now 1 week ago, all of this was integrated into Photoshop. And there goes your artistic practice, if that is what you base your artistic practice on. I think that is also why many people, even though the stories are now repeating, but are going into more like a narrative approach to all of this. Even though I think, like using data sets of 3 images and a neural network that is like tiny could also be a very good approach of doing it yourself, like from this underfunded, very basic approach, which I think would probably be more the artistic approach in the end anyway.
Okay, I think we want Kieran to get into the conversation, and let me check. Kieran, can you join the conversation and ask your question? So I guess, yeah. There's no video?
Hi, Christoph. Yes, I'm having some problems turning on my video. So
okay.
I could go on, or you could, if there are other questions, I can also come back.
Well, I have just now, no, it's now your turn.
Okay, good. I just had a question regarding to both the artists actually, because of course, as positioning yourselves as artists in the tech and digital art space, it also seems to me, pardon me, because I don't know your backgrounds as such in art, that it seems that you have somewhat a kind of a freedom to place yourself in different artistic lineages of your own choosing in a way. I guess that a liberty that, say, a video artist didn't have, because it came within the lineage of visual art very strongly. But somehow, while you're talking about manipulating the image at the level of the pixel and going into the visuality sort of disappears and dissipates. And we saw that in some of the works, especially the exhibition work, that it does move into quite out of the visual art space, but I was wondering how much you feel yourself somehow magnetically being kept within the domain of visual art, or whether you feel liberated enough to kind of, how free do you feel with this medium?
Okay, so this is going to Vishal, I think, first. Is that right? As he should answer this right now.
Well, both of them, but
yeah. Okay, I would say, well, Vishal, because I would subscribe to that in a way. It's a very strong aesthetic approach, and it's based on very much based in video. Let's say, you know, in a video aesthetics, how the how he manipulates the pixels in the video, and also leading to a certain kind of question if there's some kind of getting like an adolescence of the AI tech art from the visual art scene, which should be like, well, it's a good medium to talk about. I'm still a little bit fixed to this AR art thing, but you know, talking about AI art often means that you will need video to talk about it. So in a way, to tell stories, or that you show the works, how it interferes, how it would be performed. So you're still in like the old medium of video art, and talking about like the next technology step would be like, I guess it is something on the way that your question was. But first of all, I hope that Vishal can directly answer your question, Vishal.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, my question would be like, who defines what visual art is, right? Like, who gets the rights to define that? That in itself is problematic to me. Primarily because like I wasn't trained in art. Like for me, I only just have a MA, and then I'm just kind of doing stuff that I want to do without being bound by any traditional practice. That's primarily because I just don't have any training in any traditional practice. I can't sing, I can't dance, I can't do anything in visual art. I can't draw or paint. And I have a very healthy disdain to practices that are rigid. And I started off doing photography and film. So it's always been about an interaction, a relationship with a tool. So it was always about the camera. The image almost became irrelevant. So even now you see the videos, like I also do some crazy stuff. Like I just delete my entire hard drive 1 year. I just did it because because I was just making video art that whole year. I was just enamored by the process of making video art. But it's like, for me, it was more about that question of agency, right? Like it's my practice, right? Why does it fit into the category that I'm trying to do it? If you also just, I can send you old bios and stuff, but you'll see that every year my bio has changed. Like 1 year I'm a new media artist, 1 year I'm a tech artist, 1 year, like this year I'm just doing AI-based projects. I'm an AI-based artist. But I used to care about it, but I don't really care about it because that freedom is more precious to me, to be able to just wake up one morning and be like, hey, I want to work with a performer because I'm doing something that I think would work well with a performer, or I want to work with a musician, or I would just want to work with somebody who's drawing because maybe I want to train an algorithm to learn how they draw. But that's the whole thing, right? Like that freedom, I don't know, I guess maybe because you are trained in some sort of a traditional discipline, I'm assuming. But it's, for me, without having any of that background, it was easier, but it's also problematic because that means that I don't understand what it means to have a practice, the rigors of a practice, right? Things are a lot wider, like the net is cast a lot wider. So my research also kind of goes really extreme ends of the spectrum, whether it's in technology, whether it's in anthropology or sociology, it just kind of goes to extreme ends. But for me, primarily within my practice is like, the focus is that technology is a sociological concern, right? It is not just a tool, like it affects us every single day. And without talking about it, for me, that's also my problem that I have with a lot of the AI-based art that we see like, you know, big names like Rafi Kanadol or whoever, right? Who are creating this massive sort of data sets and then projecting them onto buildings. It's good, but it doesn't move beyond the spectacle. It needs to move beyond the spectacle. If it doesn't, and you don't, as a viewer, you're not able to ask critical questions of that technology, then it's already problematic to me to say that, hey, I'm an AI artist, but this is where your engagement stops. Your engagement stops at looking at the LA orchestra building or whatever that you projected that piece on. Well, that's kind of, it's just going back into how the art world already functions. Just that curtain, right? Without that curtain, and that curtain is the way technology functions. Without that curtain being there, then it's your privy. That's the, like what Sebastian was saying with tech and AI, it's been like, there's still gatekeepers, right? You still need a really powerful computer to be able to do a lot of the really big things in AI or machine learning. But that small gesture, like you were saying, like having those training three images and using a neural network to learn from it, that in itself is like sort of antithetical to the whole conversation. Yeah, so for me, it's like, it's never a question of like, oh, does it fit into something? It's just always a question of like, if I'm going to show it somewhere, how is that space going to make it fit my work? If I'm showing it in a physical space, but working online, then it's just always easier because I can control the means of showing the work.
So I'm Kiran, is that the answer that you expected, or do you want to get a deeper, or ask Sebastian? Just, are you satisfied?
Well, I'm happy to hear Sebastian too, and then maybe let's see what the conversation.
Yeah, and then we go on to Marsha, who has raised her hand next. Okay, so Sebastian.
Yeah, I find it a super difficult question. Because I do have a gallery that until recently had a proper space, which they gave up because of Corona, didn't make any sense anymore. And I constantly hear this, of course, you need to make stuff that we can put on the wall and so on, which in the end, I'm like, I don't know, maybe. But I come from a background of something which was called net art, where it was not so much about like standard art world and all these mechanisms, but the hope of like doing it online in your own like spaces. But then I have to say, in the end, I still want to be able to exhibit like in real life physically. So I still try to make installations or projections or something which allow me to go into space and have the opportunity to exhibit. So in that sense, I also don't feel like too like I take freedom, but I think you still have to play by some rules and make something that you can exhibit and that can especially work on Instagram these days. I think, like that's always like when I make an installation, of course, I try it out. What does it look like on Instagram? So, yeah, I think it doesn't really answer your question, but I also find it pretty hard to answer.
No, I mean, it wasn't, again, I wasn't kind of narrowing down to a specific answer because I just see a parallel somewhere, or maybe just in my imagination, between that turn in conceptual art, which also did this thing of dematerializing different disciplines and kind of disintegrating these boundaries, precisely also in a kind of a political gesture of abstaining from circulating an object within certain power spheres, right? And somewhere tech art, it offers, like you say, that especially the early turn in these things has that seed of a possibility. But I again see the ocular centricism of our cultures kind of subverting these tendencies constantly. And so it was just to see how personal strategies function. But thank you both for your responses.
So Marsha, are you ready to jump in?
I am ready to jump in. Thank you all. Absolutely fascinating discussion for so many reasons. And certainly the whole question of how tech art connects to post-conceptual practice. I was having that same impulse and also thinking about maybe the issue around narrative, and then also thinking about the complicity of the artist in producing the artwork in an art world that is very privileged, because this conversation, I think we have to acknowledge, is incredibly privileged for some of the reasons that Christoph identified, and also that Vishal has been talking about. This idea of being able to present the work on your own terms is an expression of privilege that for me raises lots of questions. But let me ask you something a little bit more specific, and that relates to the complexity. And thinking about how it is that on the one hand, we're developing these projects that are more nuanced, often in many cases, bigger, they demand more attention, both of the artists and of those engaging with them. And then more often than not, I encounter them in contexts like this, where they're boiled down to just a few minutes of description. So there's a kind of synopsis that happens that I think often does violence to the work. And yet in some ways it opens it up because it means more people can access it. And I guess I'm wondering the extent to which you are aware of this, that you're thinking about this when you're making work, you're actually making kind of maybe two works simultaneously because they're circulating in different contexts. And also maybe my bolt-on question would be whether or not the artist has the same kind of responsibility that, say, for instance, Hans Haacke felt profoundly to interrogate the systems of creative production and their role within them. Is that something that TechArt does, or are the questions different? Thank you.
Yes. Do we want? Who wants to answer that first? Well, I think just to get, so I just take it a little bit as far as I understood. Well, I think there is a certain kind of a way that conceptual artists have engaged their practice and deeply been digging into the social, economic, societal, all this kind of processes, and have been working there and have elaborated that and have quite impressive, astounding examples of how they can deal with this kind of work that plays in a kind of a social theater place, you know, and showing up what is as a structure, as a kind of imagery in all this kind that we are bound to and what we are a part of. So, and still for me, it would be interesting to ask, would that mean that if you have in this context work that would definitely work around this context, you know, just speaking about them and having like an ethical position, like a moral position, and this kind of normative, this power of you know, setting up rules from an artistic point, or is it in a way so that we can develop, and that was so I'm coming back a little bit, that we should also develop inside this kind of new technique, and this is like my question. If we are facing the biggest step ahead now, we certainly have to talk about it from this regulations and all this and political implications in that. But is there also like a different? Are there any other possibilities that, you know, derive a certain kind of idea if you work inside the technique itself? That was still my impetus to find in that discussion and all this what is going on. I mean, it's getting on. I mean, for the next years, we're maybe still at the beginning of what is coming there. So maybe I have answered, or at least I have given an answer. Sebastian or Vishal, would you say something on that, or should we rush to another question?
I just didn't get the last part of what Marsha was saying. I think I got cut off, but you spoke a little bit about that sort of like the synopsis position of the works, right? When you're showing them as just these excerpts. So, I mean, for that part, I do have something I want to say, but the last part, something you said, but I couldn't hear it. So I just want to know what that was. So up until this year, maybe actually up until a month ago, all of my works were fairly open source, like they were available to watch, to show it, and I would just happily send out links. The question for me was in what space I was operating in. It became, I'll give you an example, right? So when I was on the MA in London, I was talking a little bit about, because making art as a practice was very new for me. So I was just using technology to make things to, like make sense to me. And that was just basically, I was just presenting them as my practice. It was watching the appropriation of using art practice as educational tools. So if I start talking about caste or gender from my own perspective, it was how quickly that would get appropriated by people who haven't had that experience or haven't seen or understood where I'm coming from. Because the language is easy to appropriate, right? The language is easy to appropriate, language of racial justice, for example, the language of caste justice. So for me, it became about, okay, so if the work is presenting thought in that form, then it became about, okay, let's stop the appropriation of the language. Because you appropriate the work, you take the work, you cut it up. I'm absolutely fine with somebody taking the work itself. But it was using the language, that thought. And for me, that the position of like works ending up in this state of like synopsis is also, I don't know, for me, like it has to be, it's a very, like it's a context from where I'm based. The luxury is afforded to places that have infrastructures within the art world or within tech art, for example, or within new media. We barely have any of that infrastructure here. So my way of combating that was I have to figure out who my audience is. If my audience are people that are making these sort of explicitly political works, and if the audience for that is hanging out on WhatsApp or hanging out on Facebook, then I need to be adapting that work to that platform. That was my way of dealing with it. And the rest of the stuff was basically, I was just doing it for myself. And I was like, well, I like reading and I like researching and I've been experimenting with tech. I'm going to continue doing that. But the position from which I was conducting my practice changed after coming back. Because now it was more immediate, it was needed, it was required to take the tools and turn it towards people I was surrounded by, as opposed to trying to make work for, let's say, institution XYZ in Berlin or in London. Because there was that massive disconnect. And I was like, I didn't really, at that point in time, I didn't really care what the audience in London or Berlin were looking at my work and thinking about it. Because it was no longer my job to educate that audience to say, hey, like, you know, within this work, I'm talking about these things. The technology part, yes, I think that should be the role. That's my view. That should be the role of informing the viewer or the audience, saying that, hey, this is the technology part, make it simpler, make it, things need to be able to understood much better and a lot easier. But the context, the part where you're talking about things that people have different experiences to, yeah, my view is just that I shouldn't be the one making that, like performing that labor.
Okay, thank you, Vishal. We have to get a note here from the stuff that we should pose already the last question. So I have in row Sebastian Drab, yes, and Rashmi. And are you both still into your question? And so I will then just follow it up like I have it in the list. Or have you already had an answer to that, Sebastian?
No answer really.
Okay, so would you?
I'm still into my question.
So please, yes. So now it's your turn.
For me, the question relates a little bit to what you said in the intro. You showed a clip of some guy called James who was talking about the impact of the internet and how it would fundamentally change society. And for me, at least, the promise of the internet was that like you would have free access and like spread of knowledge and communication very openly and freely. But in today's day, when the internet is increasingly moderated by private companies and states. For example, in China, when you have like a big rate filter, and in Facebook, when there essentially is a big rate filter too, is the promise of what the internet was supposed to be changing, and what are we doing about that? We're just saying, okay, cool, new.
Okay. Sebastian, would you answer?
Okay. Well, tough one. So, I think I kind of follow your description of like free, open, and all that stuff. I don't know if it's actually true, because I can just remember being a kid and we would share MP3s on websites, and it was totally legal basically, because nobody cared if you made a website and put MP3s on it. But I think back in these days, there was also a lot of like commerce going on the internet. Anyway, let's roll with it and say that is actually what's happening, yeah, or has been happening, yeah. Yeah, what can we do? I think there's quite a few things now happening, trying to build different platforms to and I think that it goes in various ways. Like, one is to say like, okay, you have an alternative to Twitter, which is then Mastodon, which is like open source, self-hosted on all these things, where I still have some doubts, because in the end it's the same as Twitter. So it's still like you have to push something that gets a lot of retweets. There it's called like toots, I think, retweets, but it's still like the same attention economy game, where it's just like pushing to get attention. But there's also this, I would say, reappearance of like the slow web, where people sit down and write some HTML, and it just takes time. And so the speed of thinking and making is aligned again, not just like pushing. And I think, to me, this like aligning speed of making and thinking could maybe be something that helps. That doesn't still allow you to post MP3s on the internet. This I don't know how to solve.
Okay, I would very much like to have Rashmi in for the last words or question. Maybe, yes.
Thanks, Christoph. I think I'm going to keep it quite short. And this is sort of piggybacking on all of the conversation that's happened tonight and fabulous work that we've seen. It's just something that I kind of hung on to when Sebastian said, can data sets be poetic? And so as a person who's just starting to dabble with all of this data and information, how can your bias, or how is your bias really influencing the work that comes out? And is that okay? And to what level or what extent is that okay? And if it's poetic, does it actually mean, does it have bias, or is it something that is more generic? And I think the questions for either of you, whoever wants to answer it.
Well,
I answered the previous one, so I think we should take turns here.
Poetic, but not correct. I don't know. I don't want to give the final comment on that. It's a nice question. I mean, that's about art, producing art. Yeah.
Yeah, I really think it should stay as a question.
Yeah.
I think it's a very individual take. It's a great thing to think about as part of the workshop, because I would be really excited to see how everybody would think about it in that way. Yeah, I think it should it's a really, really good way to think about it.
Well, so then from my side, I would give over to Archana or Kamya for, I think, something like the wrap up, or what is it called? The final wave goodbye. Thank you.
I guess that would be the thank you note. Kamya, if you're in, would you like to take that, or I'd be happy to take it on? All right. So first of all, thank you all for being part of this evening. Christoph, um, your questions, your line of questioning was very interesting for sure. And also your work, I think, especially some of the things that stood out is, where are these boundaries? Where are these lines between, say, surveillance as camera weapon? All of this really kind of jumped out at me. Just the same way as Vishal's own work, I think Vishal, speaking from, from this local position that you've decided to investigate more closely, I think there's something um, really exciting about the fact that you're approaching. I mean, I really love the fact that your AI is made in India or in this kind of local climate. And what does that mean? Because we're so attuned to this Western-centric or kind of Eurocentric or America-centric, depending on where we're looking, world. And I think there's something to this kind of this inquiry around locating or what are the big topics that kind of jump out at us from different geographies that we have, and how does that reflect on the kind of biases, the kind of frameworks that AI might eventually have. I think some of the audience certainly did ask where does this line between blurring of is this AI based art or is this a commentary or a video piece? I think all of you seem to have this constant blurring of media, medium, and this playfulness even between these new technologies, and also this kind of documentary style or commentary, or this style of talking about what's going on, the kind of critical questions on what's happening, and how do we all think about it and kind of frame our future. I think, Sebastian, your piece, especially the fact that it uses these really commercial software that is meant to sell product, and then kind of turns it back on itself and says how I really like that kind of shape that this kind of bar graph style, like almost apex to this future. And I think I speak for some of us in the room, definitely some of our fellows, and certainly the team, is that we're constantly asking this question with Bengaluru Fantastic of where are we all currently, and where does the future go with where we stand, the technologies we have. I think Marsha brought up this point of we certainly are in a extremely privileged place to even be playing with these technologies, to have access to this and cast these visions into the future. And I guess each of us in our own practice question these privileges in our own ways, in our own right. Who has these privileges? Why do we have them? How do we democratize it? And these are all kind of like Rashmi's question in the end. These are all great questions to have. I'm glad they came into the room. I'm super grateful to all of you, our speakers, our provocator, our fellows, and the wider public, to have brought it in. I feel like this is kind of the hope of our of our own platform, is to kind of ask those questions, pose them. I don't think there's a single answer or a simple answer. So it maybe a lot of what we do as artists and creators is to ask those difficult questions in ways that can be either understood or accessed by different types of people. I have to do my kind of like my duties, and a very special one of that is to thank our funders again once more. Honestly, it's really hard to get any kind of funding in this landscape that we all find ourselves, and the generosity and kind of vision of our own cultural funders, the Goethe Institute, Max Muller Bhavan, Bangalore, and the British Council is deeply appreciated. I forgot to mention earlier, didn't forget, but really I was just so excited to get this this dialogue going earlier, but really that we we deeply miss Caroline. She was meant to join us. I think she would have added a whole additional new layer and perspective to our conversation today. Unfortunately, for health reasons, she wasn't able to do so, to be here this time, but hopefully we'll have more of these sessions. I feel like there's certainly space for more such dialogues. With that, a big thank you and good evening, good night. Thank you all.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye. Ciao.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thanks. Ciao.